So we're in the 13th chapter, the penultimate chapter of Ketubot, and we're pursuing the sayings of these guys, Hanan and Admon. Hanan said two things, Admon says seven. And there seems to be an on-off pattern with Admon because the halakha accepts half of halakha seems to accept every other saying of his. And some of them are related to Ketubot and some are not. So it's really fascinating pattern here in the Mishnah. But we are going to begin in the fifth Mishnah with a saying that really is related to marriage. Aposek ma'ot lachasano ufashatzlo et harega. Someone who allocated money to his son-in-law. In other words, he agreed verbally, maybe even in writing with his son-in-law, at the time of the kiddushin, at the betrothal, that he contributed to the dowry. And then he stuck his leg out. What does that mean? Well, let's just read on in the Mishnah. Tehei yoshevet ad sheyelbin rosha. She can sit until her hair turns white. So sticking his leg out, it must be something to do with going back on his promise. Now, we've already learned, by the way, that a promise is a promise. And when we came into the sixth chapter, we learned Aposek ma'ol lechatano umeit chatano, someone who pledged money or who allocated money for his son-in-law, and his son-in-law died. So there's a question as to whether if the son-in-law died, then the woman may become betrothed to if he died childless, then she may end up connected to his brother, as a yivama. So the question is going to arise, well, look, that commitment to one son-in-law, does that extend to the son-in-law's brother? And we found it didn't. We found it didn't. We found he had the right to, he could say, look, I was willing to give to your brother, but to you it's not possible. But the assumption of this Mishnah is, okay, he can back out of a commitment to his son-in-law's brother, but he can't back out of a commitment to his son-in-law. That is that, whether it's a verbal or a written commitment, that is a commitment. So what does it mean he stuck his leg out? Well, I just wanted to bring you the Bartanura, who gives three explanations. First, he stuck his leg out. He says it's Lashon Bizayon. It's a sort of contemptuous language, meaning to say, look, just take the dust that's under my feet. Another explanation is, hang me by my feet on the tree, for I haven't got anything to give you. He's saying, just get away. And Maimonides is always reliable in this kind of area, and he only gives one explanation, which means he went off on a long journey. So it sounds like the father-in-law, he went off without paying. He went off without paying. So what is the situation of this bride? Well, the first opinion in the Mishnah is that she can't do anything, right? She's betrothed to this guy. She can't exit without a get. She's like a chained woman because she can't force him to give a get, but she can't force him to marry her either. So she's a chained woman, and she could be in that situation, as the Mishnah says, ad sheyalbin rosha, until her head turns white. And Admon is going to object. Admon is going out to bat for her, and he says, Admon Omer, Ilu ani pasakti al atzmi, yoshevet al sheyalbin roshi. Admon says that effectively she can say, look, if I had allocated the money and then I'd gone back on my word, fine, it would be right for me to sit until my hair turns white. I'm responsible. But this is different. Abba pasak alai, but my father allocated the money on my behalf. Ma ani yochal la'asot. Ma ani yochal la'asot. What can I do about it? Oknos optor. In other words, either marry me or release me. That's the only fair thing to do. You can marry me or you can release me. And Rabban Gamliel is going to back him up. Amar Rabban Gamliel will back him up and her up. Amar Rabban Gamliel, and this is the language we've seen before. Ro'eh ani et divrei Admon. I see the words of Admon. And he seems to be saying, I agree with the words of Admon, like Lo ra'iti tzaddik ne'ezav v'zaro mevakesh lachem. I never agreed with a tzaddik being abandoned or his seed begging for bread. So, and here the halacha does go with Admon, actually. So the halacha follows Rabban Gamliel and it follows Admon. She can tell him, marry me or release me. Really interesting, and release, by the way, means giving a get. So really interesting that in a time of the Mishnah, as we've seen time and time again, by the way, it seems to be easier to force a man to give a get than it is today. Now Admon is going to go on to a different kind of dispute. This is a land dispute, and it's nothing to do with Ketubot at all. It's nothing to do with marriage. Orer al sadeh vehu chatum aleha ed. Someone who contests a field and is signed as a witness on it. Now, what is going on here? Well, I've expanded the translation because this is an impossible Mishnah to understand, except if we understand that this guy is the guy contesting the field. So in other words, this guy, let's say Reuven, is contesting a field owned by Yehudah. He's contesting a field. He's contesting the ownership of a field. And yet, the bill of sale that Yehudah is holding, in other words, Yehudah's evidence that he's the rightful owner of this field, is actually signed by the guy making the case. So he's contesting Yehudah's ownership of this field, but he actually signed as a witness on the bill of sale. So how can both claims be true? And yet Admon is going to let both claims be true. Admon says, Admon Omer, Asheni noachli, the second is easy for me. Veharishon kashe mimeni. The first was too hard for me. The second's easy for me, and the first was too hard for me. And he seems to be saying, the second, that is Yehudah, the current owner of the field, look, it's easy for me to take him to court. I don't mind taking him to court. Why did I sign the bill of sale when Yehudah bought the field? Well, the guy that Yehudah bought it from was a real tough cookie, and I did not want to bring him to court. So I signed the bill of sale in order to transfer in order to facilitate the transfer of this field to someone who I found it easier to take legal action against. And the Chachamim Omrem, and the sages are going to say, he bade et zechuto. He has lost all his legal rights. As soon as he signs on that bill of sale, he absolutely loses any rights to contest ownership to the field. And the halacha follows the sages, by the way. The halacha will not support Admon in this regard. What if he acknowledged the ownership of the field in some other way? So maybe, for example, there's a field next door. Maybe there's a field next door where he marked it as a boundary mark. In other words, he signed a bill of sale for the field next door and acknowledged Yehudah's ownership on the bill of sale for the field next door when they were marking out the boundary of the field. So that the bill of sale will say, oh yeah, the field next door belongs to Yehudah. He signed this. Asa'ah siman la'acher. So he made it a sign, that is a boundary sign, for another person. This is another tract of land. And the Mishnah just then says very clearly, he bade et zuchuto, he doesn't have any right then to contest the ownership of that piece of land that he may believe belonged to him. Once he's, if you like, acknowledged, even on bill of sale for a different property, that it no longer belongs to him, he cannot go back on that acknowledgement.